For at least 35 years, American fathers have been struggling for decent, fair treatment in our court system. To date, that struggle has been a miserable failure. Today, there's tens of thousands of fathers who desire nothing more than an opportunity to remain active parents in the lives of their children. The shameful reality is that courts in every state turn their backs on these decent, caring fathers. Judges, concerned with the need for greater and greater efficiency, implement policies that leave fathers standing out in the cold, looking in a world that is no longer one in which they're welcome. To all this, courts, judges, bureaucrats, and attorneys go about their daily tasks unmoved and unconcerned. Not so the children. Not so their dads. It's time to stop the cruelty now.
The worst and most incompetent parent in America is the court system. The government has no concept of what it is to be a parent, and yet they're the ones who are legislating and governing over who remains a parent to their children, and they have made a colossal mess out of this. They are responsible for child abuse from hundreds of thousands of children, not only in Michigan but all across the country. It's a national disgrace. It must stop.
Very few people realize how easily children today are taken away from their parents with no show of wrongdoing and no cause. In other words, the government can simply confiscate your children for reasons that have nothing to do with their health or safety or wishes or well-being.
So what we're looking for is we're looking for reforms. And that's essentially what all of this really boils down to, is reforming. Reforming the system as it is currently, such that children have the ability to be parented by both of their parents, moms and dads.
For too long, we've had a situation where the courts and lawyers are using children as pawns or even as weapons, pitting the child, one parent against the other. And it's very unfortunate because the ones who are hurt the most are the children and, of course, their parents.
The odds of a child growing up in a two-parent family are very low today, and I have 4 children, I have grandchildren. I'm doing it for them and for their generation.
I am Kimberly Street, the daughter of fallen hero Wilbur Street. I am a child whose father was ripped out of my life by the family court systems. I was kept away from him from the time I was in high school. When I finally turned 18 and was able to see him with no restrictions, he died a month later. I'm out here now picking up the torch from where he left off, and I'm not going to let his death go in vain.
Do our children deserve us? What are we going to do about it? We're going to let our voices be heard. Never today should we be silent again. Never again should you allow a judge to walk you out the door without you having equal access and fair treatment within their court. Otherwise, let the world know.
Not the first time that I've been on the steps of this state capitol. But if I could utter one thing, it would be, I love my country, but I fear my government. The government of this nation are nothing but a bunch of corrupt criminals, and they ought to be arrested for the violations that they have done to children and mainly to fathers. I was separated from my children many, many years ago. I've had no contact with them in 23 years. I am not alone. There are hundreds of thousands of children who've been separated from their fathers across this nation. It is criminal. I used to think that the Constitution meant something, not in the courts of this state. There isn't a judge I know of who will honor the Constitution of the United States, because as we all know, the First Amendment gives us a liberty right to raise our children. But if you dare to try to raise that issue in court, they will shut you down. Truly, when you walk into a courtroom as a father going through a divorce in this country today and for the last 30 years, you haven't got a chance in hell of being successful. And that is an American tragedy that must end.
And as I voted on the floor of the House just behind me, I also took an oath of office to support the Constitution of the state of Michigan and of the United States. And in that Constitution, Article 1, Section 1 in Michigan's Constitution, it says, all political power is inherent in the people. Government is instituted for their equal benefit, security, and protection. Now, as those words are rehearsed for me today, and I think of legislators who are even here in this midst today, taking stance on issues and supporting things that do not promote equal benefit, security, and protection, I say it's time to change. It's time that fathers and mothers who are willing to take the stand for their kids and say, regardless of the problems we have, regardless of the situation that's brought about, the divorce or whatever, ultimately it is that child that needs to be first and foremost, not only in our minds, but in the minds of the state and the government that would take on themselves to step in between. To have the opportunity to say the assumption is first there that it is best for the child to have a dad and a mom working together for their interests ought to be an assumption that we take. It ought to be an assumption that a dad has a place in the home. That without a dad, a child loses much of the value that comes from being born in that home. That a mother and a dad, though they may not work together in certain areas, ought to work together to make sure that that child has a future that allows them to be successful, allows them to establish a home in the future that stands for the building block of society, the family, that makes all the difference in the world.
I had the privilege of being married for 30 years, and my wife and I have raised and are still raising 5 children. And it breaks my heart to think that our children would not have the opportunity to be raised by 2 parents. I have a very close friend who has 4 children, who has suffered through many of the things that so many of you have suffered through. A separation, a divorce, and not being one of the custodial parents, not having the opportunity to help raise his children. You know, anytime you do legislation, there's always winners and there's losers. And the system that we have today has winners and losers. The way it's arranged today, the winners are the lawyers and the courts, the friend of the court and the judges. And the losers are the fathers and the mothers of this state. And we need to change that. And with our legislation, the winners will be the moms and the dads of Michigan, so they will each have equal opportunity to be with their children, to raise their children. And the losers, unfortunately, will be the judges and the courts and the friend of the court.
The state of Michigan is in a state of crisis. I'm not talking about our struggling auto industry. I'm not talking about the exodus of citizens to other states. I'm not even talking about Forbes magazine ranking Michigan's business climate as 45th out of the 50 states. The seeds of this crisis were sown more than 35 years ago. First, with the passage of the Child Custody Act of 1970, and then with the enactment of the No-Fault Divorce Law of 1971. These 2 laws created a system in Michigan that delivered a 1-2 punch to Michigan families. The bias in this system is to break apart a family, and this has been the result. There are currently more than 1 million active post-divorce cases in the child support system. 4 million of our fellow citizens are currently living under the tyranny of the friend of the court. 40% of the entire population of Michigan. Many millions more have been put through the divorce gristmill in the last 3.5 decades. The legacy for our children of all these fatherless, broken homes is truancy and a skyrocketing dropout rate, a teen drug abuse epidemic, teen pregnancies, juvenile crime. The friend of the court has become one of our state's biggest industries. It currently transfers more than $1.38 billion per year after taking its percentage off the top. As your next Attorney General, I'll have a very different agenda. one that will seek to minimize the damage caused by divorce, not exploit it for political gain or taxpayer funding. I will rely on parents, not judges or friend of the court bureaucrats, to decide what's in the best interests of their children.
The reality is that you can have a substantive relationship with your child on an abbreviated basis, but the reality is that quantity of time has a quality all of its own that is missing when you're relegated to a few overnights a month. And alternating weekends is what? 4 overnights a month, which is a really non-existing relationship. It's not a parental relationship. It is relegating a parent to an uncle or a similar type of relationship. People say that people accuse fathers of wanting joint custody to impact their child support obligation. It's kind of interesting. The opposite is never applied. I was in the probate court the other day, and a mother was sitting there with her daughter and son, petitioning the court to allow the daughter to have a guardianship over her brother. And the judge asked why they wanted to do this, and apparently the son had some legal difficulties. He got involved in drugs. He had been arrested for breaking and entering. And the mother said that this child obviously has some difficulties. He's in a bad crowd. The daughter had married and moved outside of the city and was willing to take on the responsibility of caring for her brother in hopes of providing a better environment. And that clearly convinced the judge that this was best for the young man, and he was agreeable to it. The judge asked about the father if he had been notified, and they said yes, he had been notified, and he also agreed. The judge said, well, I don't have anything in the file showing he was served. If he comes back, I will modify this, or at least give him a hearing. And she said, I'm prepared to grant your petition. And now, let me see, the child support, is the father currently paying child support? And the mom said, oh yes, he's works for one of the big three at that time. And now, big what, I don't know. But he said his money's withheld from his paycheck, and so we get child support regularly. And so the judge said, well, I will assign your daughter then the child support obligation. And the mom went, wait a minute, forget it, that's not going to happen. So the judge said, well, wait a minute, now what do you want your daughter to do? She's going to have your son, and certainly she should get the father's child support. And the mother said, it doesn't cost anything like the amount to care for this child as I collect in child support. That's my money. I will pay the child's expenses. And the judge said, well, I'm sorry, ma'am, that's not the way it works. She said, forget it then, he will stay with me. And they walked out of the courtroom.
My long journey through the family court system has brought me here to you to tell you that there's only one way that we're going to stop hundreds of thousands of children from dealing with the same nonsense that I had to deal with. Though the family courts claim to be out for the best interest of the children, I think that we all know differently. In my eyes, the best interest of the children is equal parenting, 50-50 visitation. There is no other way for a child to grow up happy, at all. I believe that if we do a 50-50 visitation, the courts will have no choice but to become uninvolved. They won't be able to be involved because we'll be taking care of it ourselves. Children want and need both of their parents. I wish that my parents had split custody equally. Divorce is hard enough without a child having to deal with hearing their mother and father fight over money and who's going to have them, and watching their father get arrested for non-payment of child support. The judges and lawyers seem to look at people as ATMs rather than as people who have real emotions. It's obvious that the best interest of the child is thrown aside as the lawyers' bills grow and grow and grow. For 6 months, I didn't see my dad, and I told my attorney when we went back to court that when we go there, I want you to say, okay, she can see her dad now. And he said, I don't care what you say, your mom's the one paying me. I'm not helping you. What you want is irrelevant to me. I watched for 2 years as my dad got divorced from his ex-wife. watched as he struggled every single day to stand up, to drive a stick shift to these kind of rallies that we're at right now. Last time I talked to him, he was a walking skeleton and had just been released from jail for a non-payment of child support by Judge Fred Kaiser, who told my dad to shut up and remanded him to jail for a week, 3 weeks before he died. He was a well-known father's rights activist in New Jersey who was beaten down by the system and was, in the end, completely defeated. His family life was destroyed, his financial life was destroyed, his social standing, everything. And he dedicated his every waking moment to fighting the system and making sure that his kids would have a better life, because he found out that he was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, a stress-related illness, that he had 2 to 5 years to live. When he got out, he was just a skeleton, basically. He had no body structure to him. All of his muscles were gone. We spent some time together, and I had a conversation with him, basically, you know, that you would have with someone when you know they're going to die. On August 12th, he called me and said he was going to give me his last $200 to fix the car that he had gotten me. He never called back, and he was supposed to show up to Eatontown to see me. The next day, I had a gut feeling that something was really wrong with him. And my grandfather went to go see him and discovered his dead body. He had fallen asleep and stopped breathing. So I found out I was the last person to talk to him. It took me till now, really, to be able to talk about it without crying. And even still, it's kind of hard. But I'm out here now, picking up the torch from where he left off. And I'm not going to let his death go in vain.
Let's look at some statistics. 85% of all children that exhibit behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. That's from the Center for Disease Control in Washington, D.C. 90% of all homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes. The source is the Department of Health and Human Services report out of Washington, D.C. 71% of all high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. And that's from the National Principals Association report. 75% of all adolescent patients in chemical abuse centers come from fatherless homes. And 63% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes. 80% of rapists motivated with displaced anger come from fatherless homes. 70% of juveniles in state-operated institutions come from fatherless homes. 85% of all youths sitting in prisons grew up in a fatherless home. That's from the Fulton County, Georgia jail population and the Texas Department of Corrections. Bottom line, without both parents' involvement in the children's lives, there's a lot of memories lost. There's a big part of that security network that disappears, evaporates. It's not just the father or the mother. It's the father's father and the father's mother. It's the father's uncle and the father's sister. And it's all that infrastructure we call family. And we are destroying half of the family. It's incredible.
As you know, we have national figures, major figures in American political life. Phyllis Schlafly, Mike McManus have come out in favor of shared parenting and against the ravages of the divorce industry. And many others, I think, are ready to join them as well. You also should know, I should say, from Washington, that you are not alone here, in case you had any doubts. Throughout this country, others are organizing, and if we can organize a demonstration like this here, if you can organize it, then we can do this in every state in America. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Mitch Sanderson and the North Dakota Shared Parenting Initiative are sending shockwaves throughout the divorce industry in America. Right here in Michigan and elsewhere, Mike Ross and Molly Olson and Larry Holland and others are exposing the ravages of the federal welfare spending and child support enforcement spending and how it subsidizes family breakup. The folks at Radar are directly confronting the Violence Against Women Act and other destructive legislation. So, and of course we at ACFC are doing our part too in Washington. For the last 5 years, Americans have been inundated with warnings about losing our freedom because of terrorism. Others have countered that we are in danger of losing our freedom from the government's measures against terrorism. They both have a point, but I think they're both missing the point as well. The greatest threat to our freedom today comes from within. It is the government's destruction of our families and our children. Islamic radicalism may be creating what Samuel Huntington calls a clash of civilizations, but the government's war against the family strikes at the social basis of all civilization. The divorce regime is not only a threat to social order, but also to civic freedom. What is happening today is much more serious than simply unfairness or gender bias against fathers in divorce cases. It is the government's machine for destroying the main rival and check on its power, which is the family. The most basic human rights and constitutional protections are routinely destroyed and violated in America's family courts. The lives of parents and children are in serious danger, as we learned from Wilcox Street, once they are, as the phrase is, taken into custody. Today in America, American citizens who are legally unimpeachable, who are under no suspicion of wrongdoing, who are sitting in their own homes minding their own business, can be forcibly summoned to legal proceedings and find themselves stripped of their children and subject to criminal proceedings. Americans today are subject to criminal proceedings not for public crimes, but for how they conduct their private lives. Without any action on their part, American citizens are being turned into criminals in ways they are powerless to avoid. Without demonstrating you have committed any legal transgression, government officials can now enter your home, examine your private papers and effects, empty your bank account, throw you out of your home, jail you without trial, and most serious of all, take away your children. The police state methods used by the divorce industry are not a future possibility. They are the present reality. I want to give you a short list of the practices that are routine in what used to consider itself the freest society on earth. Mass incarcerations without trial or charge, forced confessions, children forcibly separated from parents who have done nothing wrong, and parents stripped of their children without explanation. Government agents entering the homes and examining the private papers of innocent parents. Official court records, including hearing tapes and transcripts, are doctored and falsified with the knowledge of court officials, and evidence is fabricated against the innocent. Defendants are denied the constitutional right to face their accusers. Bureaucratic police are authorized to issue arrest warrants and subpoenas against parents with no hearing. Special courts are created specifically to process parents for political offenses. Forced labor facilities are being created specifically for parents. Children are instructed to hate their parents with the backing of government officials. Children are forced to act as informers against their parents with the backing of government officials. Children are abused and killed with the support of government officials. Knowingly false allegations. I could go on and on about it. We heard the story of Wilcox Street. Parents are often jailed without trial, and in one case, at least one case, fatally beaten, the case of Brian Armstrong, and then others are denied medical attention while they are in police custody. Parents are ordered by government officials to separate from their spouses on pain of losing their children. Parents are ordered to pay the private fees of officials they have not hired, whose services they have not sought or used, on pain of incarceration. And I could go on and on.
Myself and my fellow superheroes here represent Fathers for Justice. We are an army of moms, dads, grandparents, and children fighting for family law reform and equality in child custody matters. Our group is representative from Ohio, but we are spread all across the nation, and we're here today in Michigan to support the passage of House Bill 5267.
I think our goal is real simple. It's equality for kids. You know, one day kids have both parents next to them, and somebody files a divorce paper, a separation paper with the court, and the next thing you know, the children lose one of their parents. And so it's about equality for kids.
My name is Paul Fisher from Ohio, and I still have 50% visitation with my daughter, but the courts took away custody without citing any good reason. And currently, my case is on its way to the Ohio Supreme Court. If we have a victory in the Supreme Court, the outcome would be that people with shared parenting would be treated like parents. Their rights could not be stripped away by the whims of a judge.
I think one of our biggest struggles is whenever you talk about fathers' rights, the first thing that comes up is, hey, it's a bunch of deadbeat dads that don't want to pay child support. And it's just not about child support. I have equal time with my kids. They're with me every other week. I pay $4,000 in support right now per month. Okay, and
with
quite frankly,
custody.
and the kids live with me every other week. It's not about the money. It's about parents that want to see their kids. And we started this, you know, in Ohio. We've gone through 5 years of litigation. Divorce was filed in June of 2001. It's still going on, and we can't get a decision from the courts. And it took 4.5 years. There were times when I couldn't see my kids at all. I had supervised visitation based on nothing but false allegations for months at a time. And finally, in November of 05, the mother was caught red-handed on tape coaching the kids to say they were abused. And she was put on supervised visitation for that. And immediately, 45 days later, she was completely forgiven, and we're back to this 50% custody, which I think is great. Every kid should have equal time with their parents as long as both parents are fit. If they're not fit, but the problem that we fight, you know, that we're battling, these folks are going to battle with this initiative on the ballot, is that groups that come out against them are going to say, hey, it's all about trying to get out of paying child support. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with dads want to see their kids. Dads are good parents too, and the best parent is both parents. It's real simple.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And we need to criminalize any type of false allegations used in child custody matters. You know, I am Scott's wife, and as a stepmother who has my own 3 children and went through my own divorce where we settled everything amicably and we have a shared parenting agreement without the help of the courts, I come into the situation as a stepmother, for which I am a very good stepmother, and yet his ex-wife has accused me through the children and through Children's Services of physical abuse, and even their older step-siblings of sexual abuse crimes. And so therefore our entire family has been devastated. We have spent over 6 figures of money we don't have. We're totally indebted in charge cards, but we will not give up the fight, and we are here today in Michigan to build our army, and we are going to do this lawfully. But if we cannot get the government to stand up and support the families, then we're going to go all the way.
As one lawyer said to me one day in the halls of the Oakland County Courthouse, you have to understand something. Law is practiced here, not justice.
We have created a huge bureaucratic machine in this country. A bureaucratic machine on the federal, state, and local level, which exists for no other purpose than for taking children away from their parents.
No one should have to feel the pain of losing their fathers.
The first thing any citizen, particularly parents, can do is get involved.
The way it's arranged today, the winners are the lawyers and the courts, the friend of the court and the judges. And the losers are the fathers and the mothers of this state. And we need to change that. And with our legislation, the winners will be the moms and the dads of Michigan, so they will each have equal opportunity to be with their children, to raise their children. And the losers, unfortunately, will be the judges and the courts and the friend of the court.